Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, or welcome back if you're a returning subscriber. My name is Francis Pannulla, and I'm a personal development and recovery coach based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I want to make a video today on self-talk, and we'll define self-talk, and especially negative self-talk, as the things that we say to ourselves that are unhelpful. And sometimes we're our own worst critics, and we're harsher with ourselves than we would be with other people in our lives. And I want to make a video talking about how we can begin to identify some of our own language that we use with ourselves, how we can make some adjustments, and how we can learn to think more positively about ourselves. And we'll begin with the first step in this process, and that would be the awareness. When there's something that you'd like to change or something that you'd like to work on, the first step is often becoming aware of the issue itself. And I would say that you have some level of awareness of this issue if you're looking at videos about self-talk and things like that. But becoming aware in the moment of the language that we were using with ourselves and our own thought spiral, our own thought process can help to kind of head that off and take in a more positive direction early on instead of feeding into it. And some of these things that can be red flags that can bring your awareness to the situation would be, your language, and they'd be things like blanket statements. And blanket statements are usually things that are said in extreme, like things like always and never, sentences like things always go poorly for me, or things never work out for me, to use negative statements, or I must do well at this, I have to succeed at this, I have to do this. And when we're putting that level of pressure on ourselves, or we're thinking in these extremes at these ends of the spectrum, it's very difficult sometimes to rein that in. And that thought process in itself, and I'd used the word spiral a moment ago, can progress and get more negative. And sometimes it can last minutes, it can last hours, it can last days if you're in a depressive cycle. And these negative statements that we're giving to ourselves are only feeding into that process. So with that awareness, if I find myself using these words like always, never, I must, I have to, that kind of tells me to take a step back, to kind of give myself a breather and assess the situation and ask myself a few questions. And that'll bring me to the next step. And then step two, let's stop. And I put a stop sign here, and I think that this is kind of the crux of cognitive behavioral therapy in of itself, is learning a thought pattern or behavior, putting a stop sign there, where previously you had just been flying on through. Once you develop the negative thought, now you're running with it. Well, we want to first put a stop sign there, so now we're not just proceeding straight as previously we were, but now we have the choice, to go in a different direction, to go left, to go right. And some of these questions ask ourselves to help ourselves go left or go right. To dispute these thoughts that we're having is what I'm saying about myself or thinking, is it accurate? Is it true that these things always happen to me, or these things never happen to me? Is it 100% and 0% statistically, or is it kind of somewhere in the middle? Because life tends to be far more of a mixed bag than, towards one end of the extreme or the other. Is what I'm saying to myself helpful? Because even if I have some evidence that this issue isn't working out, or previously is not working out, sometimes even the negative thought that we're having is not going to help us achieve success in the situation. Beating ourselves up over it really isn't going to help. So is there a more helpful statement that I can make, or is there adjustments that I can make without that level of harshness? And something in the line of the harshness is, what I say is that something I would say to a friend, because we're often so critical and so harsh with ourselves, where we wouldn't say these things to other people. And if we imagine what a friend would say to us in the situation, it's often far kinder than the things that we're saying to ourselves. So sometimes I actually like to think, what would someone else say to me, or what would I say to a friend in this situation, to give myself an alternate thought pattern, something more positive. Another question I ask myself, am I being extra? Like, am I being extreme in what I'm thinking? Because if I find myself so emotionally swayed that I'm making these blanket statements and I'm saying always and never, is there something going on? Am I just being really extra at the moment? And sometimes that's something else going on. There's a phrase, an acronym, a HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And that if you're one of these four things, if you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're feeling lonely, if you're very tired, that sometimes we react differently or more extremely than we normally would in a situation. So if I find myself, like I've said before, in my bag, like, then I ask myself, is something else going on? Is this situation that deep? Is what I'm saying helpful? Is what I'm saying accurate? Would I say this to somebody else? And if the answer to all these questions is no, then I can kind of let up and stop down that path and then take that step back and go a different direction. And forgive me if I'm flying through these. I'm trying to make the video still kind of fast, but informative. So let's see. So for step 3, and this is something that I think is really important, and it's actually a tool that I didn't use for the first few months after I had learned it some years ago. But after applying it, I found that actually is very beneficial. And it's actually visualizing the negative and positive thoughts in a form, like an entity, a person, a thing. And some people, I was going to put like a kind of, old religious connotation, be like the angel and devil on your shoulders. I decided to go a different direction. I put like a wise owl and I put like a jester. And to think about these positive and these negative statements that you'd be saying to yourself, like the jester, if that's the person's job is to make witty, pithy comments that are probably unhelpful, imagine that that's kind of the person that it's coming from. So when I think these negative thoughts about myself, I'm like, oh, well, that's what that person always says. So maybe if you know someone that is habitually negative, like a negative Nancy or whatever, to use an old phrase, in your life, or to imagine that's kind of always what you're going to get from that side, that part of your brain. Whereas on the other side, what would somebody who's very helpful, very wise, very knowledgeable, what would that person say to you? If you can imagine people in your life, that you've had around you that were very helpful, what might they say? And sometimes actually reaching out to these people, is very helpful. But in the moment, visualizing these first, the negative thought pattern, where it's coming from, is something just really unhelpful. That these thoughts aren't necessarily true, they're not necessarily accurate, and that just because we think them, we don't have to own them. So by actually kind of removing it by one level and making it kind of a third party, I'm not making these thoughts, first person. I'm just thinking of the peanut gallery in the back of my head that has usually negative things to say. And then on top of that, I went a step further and thought, okay, well, let's create a positive voice for myself. So now I have a negative thought like, oh, you won't be able to do that. That's not going to work. Like, what is a positive thought? Let's give it a shot. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. We can make adjustments. Like, what are the positive thoughts that I can think? And that'll take us on to step 4. And because I don't want to completely, miss out on the learning experience from any kind of even challenge, issue, difficulties that we have, while still not letting it emotionally set me back or put me in a negative space, I ask myself, like, still, was there a lesson? When I said about, is there an adjustment I can make, So instead of just feeling that despair and that woe is me and oh, this never works out, this always happens, ask myself, am I doing the same thing over and over again without making adjustments? Is there something I can do differently? Is there something I can take away from this? Is there somebody I can ask questions about this? And that's why the next person I put has a little light bulb, overhead, and to try and think about this from a more healthy, positive perspective instead of just a negative perspective, and then to become your own cheerleader. I think that oftentimes if we are a person who usually has negative thought patterns, negative self-beliefs, that we kind of have to amplify that other side quite a bit. So it's almost like we have to start pouring more energy, be extra in the other direction to kind of give ourselves that positivity, that reassurance, the confidence that we need, while still being able to learn the lessons. I still want to be able to, make adjustments. If I just have full confidence, but I never make any adjustments, that doesn't sound sustainable either. So I think that sometimes especially for a person, if you're very self-aware, some of these things that we're critical about ourselves, there may be a lesson there, but we don't really have to beat ourselves up over it. And this is something that I've worked with people on in my own life and with clients, because I find that there's a mix of people who beat themselves up a whole lot. When they do something wrong, they will pummel themselves and they feel terribly, but they don't make adjustments. And they will apologize profusely, but then they wind up doing the same thing again because they're not making any adjustments. But then I see other people who, aren't really aware, and they don't don't really make adjustments, and that's also unhelpful. They don't have the same stress level, but at least until you're aware of the issue, it's not really on your mind. And then you have some people who they make adjustments, but they don't really spend the time beating themselves up over it. They're like they say an athlete has to be able to forget the last shot. If you miss the last shot, you have to be able to move on from it, and sometimes that's really what it takes. If you fall off the horse, to get back on it, that ability to just move on, learn the lesson without beating yourself up. And it's something that I found helpful, and I think finding that mix, learning where you're at on that spectrum, and then finding your own balance. As with everything else, we're kind of trying to find where we on that spectrum. Are we extreme? Are we extra one way or the other? And find what works for us and where our balance is. And as always, in the next step, thank you. Have a fantastic day. I hope this video is helpful, informative. And as always, if there's any questions, comments, reach out. And for any private coaching, you can email me. It's in the About section or comments. All right, thank you. Bye.